The rhythmic clatter of hooves against the damp earth echoed through the vast countryside as the morning fog curled around the silhouette of a lone rider. The man in the saddle had everything the world could offer: money, influence, a sprawling estate, but none of it compared to the bond he shared with his prized stallion. The horse was unlike any other, a magnificent creature with a strange energy about him, almost as if he carried a secret buried deep within his restless spirit. For years, the millionaire had indulged his love for horses, acquiring the rarest breeds, yet something about this one unsettled him in a way he couldn't explain. It wasn't fear, nor was it uncertainty, just a gnawing feeling that there was more to this animal than met the eye. What had started as an impulse buy at an elite auction had turned into an obsession. The moment he had laid eyes on the horse, he'd felt an unshakable pull, as though the universe itself had whispered in his ear, urging him to make the purchase. And so, without hesitation, he had outbid every competitor, securing the stallion at an astronomical price. Some said he was a fool for paying so much, but deep down, he knew he had made the right decision. The horse was different. The way he moved, the way he responded, it was almost human, as if he understood far more than he should. Yet, the true mystery didn't begin to unfold until the night he found himself alone in the stables, watching the animal behave in ways that defied logic. It started subtly. A flicker of light in the horse's dark eyes, a low hum in the air whenever he stood too close, the peculiar way time seemed to stretch and bend whenever he was around him. At first, he dismissed it as fatigue. Running an empire was exhausting, and perhaps his mind was playing tricks on him. But then the real proof came, undeniable and terrifying in its implications. One night, after an especially grueling day, he had gone to check on the horse and found something that sent a cold rush through his veins. The stallion wasn't where he had left him. Instead, the horse stood at the far end of the stable, despite the fact that every gate had been locked, every entry secured. There had been no sound, no movement, just an inexplicable shift that left him questioning everything he knew about reality. Determined to uncover the truth, he set up cameras, watching the footage obsessively. The first few nights revealed nothing, just an ordinary horse in an ordinary stable. But then, on the third night, the footage captured something that should have been impossible. One moment, the horse was standing still, its ears twitching at the distant sounds of the night. The next, it disappeared, vanished into thin air, only to reappear seconds later in a different part of the stable. No break in the footage, no glitches, just a seamless transition, as if time itself had folded around the animal. His mind reeled. He replayed the footage over and over again, searching for an explanation that didn't defy everything he understood about physics. But deep down, he knew this wasn't a trick, wasn't some illusion. The horse had moved in a way that defied the very nature of time and space. And if that was possible, then the implications were staggering. Could it be controlled? Could the horse be the key to something far greater than wealth? Something beyond even human comprehension? The questions consumed him. He ran tests, tracking every movement, monitoring every anomaly. Days turned to weeks, his curiosity morphing into obsession. The more he studied, the more he realized that this wasn't just about the horse, it was about what lay beneath the surface of reality itself. Time, as he had always understood it, wasn't fixed. It wasn't linear. It could be bent, manipulated, rewritten. And his horse, his mysterious, impossible horse, was the proof. But proof wasn't enough. He needed more. If the horse could step between moments, what else was possible? Could he follow? Could he unlock the secret hidden within this phenomenon? The idea of an infinite fortune paled in comparison to the power of stepping beyond the boundaries of time itself. He had spent years chasing wealth, But this was something greater. Something no amount of money could buy. Yet, for all his discoveries, one question remained. If the horse could move through time, had he always done so alone? Or was there something or someone waiting on the other side? The thought sent a shiver down his spine, because if he was right, then he wasn't just unlocking a secret. He was opening a door. And doors, once opened, don't always lead where you expect them to. The next few days became a blur, each moment spent in restless observation, trying to decipher the impossible nature of the horse's ability. The stable, once a place of quiet comfort, now felt like the edge of something vast and unknowable. He could barely sleep, haunted by the flickering images caught on camera, by the moments of stillness where time itself seemed to hesitate. His empire, his wealth, the things that once consumed his mind faded into the background. All that mattered now was understanding. How long had the horse been able to do this? Had it always been this way? Or had something changed after coming into his possession? And, most importantly, what would happen if he pushed the limits of what the horse could do? His staff began to notice the shift in him. The man who had once been in complete control, commanding every room he entered with unwavering confidence, now seemed distant. Conversations with business partners became distractions. Meetings felt like wasted time. Every excuse to return to the stables, to watch, to test, became more frequent. He started bringing in experts, physicists, veterinarians, even those who studied the paranormal, but no one had answers. The horse appeared normal in every conceivable way. Blood tests, muscle scans, neurological exams, nothing stood out. Yet, the undeniable truth remained. The animal was not bound by the same rules as everything else. And then, one evening, the mystery deepened. A storm had rolled in, thunder rumbling across the estate as rain pounded against the stable's roof. He was alone, watching his horse, when the flickering sensation in the air returned. It was always subtle at first, an almost imperceptible hum that settled in his bones. But this time, something was different. As lightning split the sky, illuminating the world for the briefest second, the horse disappeared, not just shifting within the stable, but completely vanishing. The space where he had been standing was empty. Panic set in. He stumbled back, breath caught in his throat, heart pounding in his chest. He waited, expecting the horse to reappear as it always had. But the seconds stretched into minutes, and then longer still. The idea that he had somehow pushed too far, that he had lost the creature entirely, made his skin crawl. Had the storm interfered? Had he unknowingly triggered something that sent the animal beyond reach? Just as fear took hold, another flash of lightning illuminated the space, and there he was. The horse stood exactly where he had been before, as if nothing had happened, but something was different. His coat, usually sleek and unmarred, bore streaks of mud that hadn't been there before. The patterns were strange, unlike anything found on his estate. Approaching cautiously, he ran a hand down the horse's neck, his fingers grazing the dirt clinging to the animal's skin. It was thick, damp, and as he lifted his hand to his nose, the scent was foreign. Not from his land. Not from anywhere nearby. His horse had gone somewhere else. Somewhere real. This wasn't a trick of the mind or some anomaly of perception. The horse was traveling, moving beyond this place, beyond this time. The implications sent a thrill through his veins, but also a chilling realization. If the horse had been somewhere else, what had it seen? And worse, had it been seen? The need for answers became unbearable. He knew he had to push further, to go beyond simple observation. If his horse could step through time, then maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to follow. But the question that haunted him most wasn't if he could, it was whether he should. Because for all the possibilities, all the unspoken promises of fortune and knowledge, there was one truth he couldn't ignore. Time is not meant to be touched. And whatever force allowed his horse to do the impossible, it had been left undiscovered for a reason. A restless energy burned inside him now, a gnawing urgency that refused to be ignored. The horse wasn't just slipping through time, it was returning with evidence, proof that it had traveled to places unknown. That changed everything. If it could go somewhere else and come back, what was stopping him from controlling where it went next? And more importantly, how could he use this to his advantage? The thought of wealth beyond imagination no longer seemed like a fantasy. If he could send messages, objects, perhaps even himself through time, he could manipulate the future, rewrite his fortune, and shape history itself. But the more he thought about it, the more another unsettling realization crept in. If time travel had become part of his reality, then who else might have discovered it before him? And worse, who might be watching now? Determined to test his theory, he devised an experiment. That night, after ensuring the estate was quiet, he gathered a handful of objects: an antique pocket watch, a sealed letter with today's date, a small gold coin, and tied them securely into a pouch fastened to the horse's saddle. If the horse disappeared again, he'd have something tangible to prove it had gone somewhere else. Something that might return with clues, a message, anything to explain what was happening. Hours passed, but nothing happened. Frustration began to settle in until the horse's ears flicked forward sharply, as if hearing something beyond human perception. The air around them thickened with an invisible force, humming with an energy he was beginning to recognize. Then, in the blink of an eye, the stallion was gone. He didn't breathe. Every nerve in his body strained for the moment when it would return. And when it finally did, his stomach twisted with an emotion he couldn't name. The pouch was still fastened to the saddle, but the watch was shattered. The coin was tarnished beyond recognition, and the letter he had sent was no longer sealed. Someone had opened it. Worse still, beneath the message he had written, there was a reply written in ink that had dried decades ago. The words sent a chill through his spine. "You are not the first. You will not be the last. Stop before it's too late." His fingers clenched around the letter, heart hammering so hard it drowned out every other sound. Someone had found it. "Read it," responded. That meant whoever or whatever was on the other side knew about him now. And if they had been waiting for a message, then maybe they had been waiting for him too. Panic warred with exhilaration. He had proof, absolute, undeniable proof, that his horse wasn't just wandering through time at random. It was being noticed, tracked. The implications should have sent him running, should have made him consider the warning for what it was. But instead, it only fueled his obsession. Because if someone else knew the truth, that meant they had answers. Answers he needed. He prepared for another test, this time with a different plan. He wouldn't just send a message. He would send something unmistakable, something that would demand a response. He wrapped a modern wristwatch around the horse's saddle and tucked a photograph of himself inside the pouch. A challenge. A statement. A way to see if whoever was out there would acknowledge him directly. The horse vanished again, swallowed by whatever unseen force governed its movement. This time, the weight felt unbearable. He paced the stable, his pulse quickening with every passing minute. But when the stallion reappeared, something was wrong. It stood rigid, muscles tense, nostrils flaring as if it had seen something beyond comprehension. The pouch was back, but the wristwatch was missing. The photo, however, remained. Except it wasn't the same. His breath caught as he pulled it out, his hands shaking as he turned it over. It was still a picture of him, same pose, same clothes, but it wasn't the photograph he had sent. The background had changed. No longer the stable. No longer the present. In the new version of the image, he was standing somewhere unfamiliar, surrounded by buildings that didn't exist yet. The sky behind him was darker, heavier. And though the picture had no sound, he swore he could almost hear the distant echo of something coming, something inevitable. And then, in the corner of the image, barely visible in the shadow behind him, was a figure. Watching. Waiting. He dropped the photo like it burned. Someone had taken it. Someone in a future he had never been to. Someone who already knew he was coming. The photograph lingered in his shaking hands, a weight far heavier than paper. His own face stared back at him, from a place he had never been, a future that shouldn't exist. At least, not yet. But the real horror wasn't in the image itself. It was in the shadow, the unmistakable presence of someone or something watching from behind him. He could almost feel its gaze, reaching across time, waiting for him to take the next step. The warning in the letter had been clear. Stop before it's too late. But he had ignored it, pushing further, daring to challenge something he had never truly understood. And now there was no going back. Determined to take control before whatever was out there made its move, he prepared for the final test. This time, he wouldn't just send objects. He wouldn't just wait. He would go himself. If his horse could slip through time, then he had to find a way to follow. The risk was immense, but so was the reward. He wasn't just chasing knowledge anymore. He was chasing fate itself. He secured a makeshift harness to the saddle, fastening himself alongside the horse. The storm outside mirrored the chaos in his mind. Winds howling as though the universe itself was warning him to stop. But he couldn't. His heart pounded as he gripped the reins, waiting for the shift, the flicker in the air, the static hum that always signaled the impossible. The horse shifted beneath him, muscles tensing. And then, reality shattered. For a split second, everything was nothing. Darkness swallowed him whole, stretching in all directions. Time didn't exist here, nor did space, only the feeling of movement without end. A sensation of being unmade and rebuilt all at once. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. He gasped, lungs desperate for air, fingers digging into the horse's mane as they stumbled onto solid ground. But the world around them was not his own. The landscape was unfamiliar, the air thick with the scent of something unnatural. Buildings loomed in the distance, their shapes wrong, too sharp, too still, as though time had frozen them mid-construction. And then he saw it, himself, standing a few yards away. There he was, same face, same clothes, but older. The man in front of him bore the same features, but time had worn them differently. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes held a knowledge that sent a shiver through his spine. He had been expected. You were never supposed to come, the older version of himself said, voice hollow with something beyond exhaustion. You think you're in control, but you've been following a path that was laid out long before you even realized it. Dread coiled in his stomach. Who are you? The words felt foolish even as he spoke them. He already knew. But the real question was, how long had this version of himself been waiting? I was you, the older man replied, stepping closer. And now you'll become me. That's the way it's always been. Realization crashed into him with the weight of 1,000 mistakes. He hadn't discovered time travel. He had been led to it guided, manipulated by forces unseen, by a future that had already played out. Every step he had taken, every decision he thought was his own, had been part of a cycle that had no real beginning or end. The horse, the messages, the warnings, they weren't just from others. They were from himself. The shadow in the photograph. The figure watching from the distance. He had spent his life chasing answers, only to find himself at the center of the question. Panic surged through him as he turned to the horse, ready to leave this place, to undo whatever he had set in motion. But the older version of himself shook his head. It won't work, he said. You've already made the choice. Now you have to see it through. A terrible understanding dawned. He wasn't here to change anything. He was here to ensure it all happened again. The hum in the air returned, the same static energy that had always signaled the horses' movement. But this time, it wasn't taking them somewhere new. It was bringing them back to the stable, to the moment before he had ever truly understood what was happening. The cycle was resetting. As the world dissolved around him, his last thought was not of wealth, not of power, but of the inescapable truth. He had never been the master of his fate. He had only been its passenger. And as the stable came back into focus, the past merging seamlessly with the present, he knew with chilling certainty he would do it all over again.